And then there's other people, usually the people who need therapy the most, that do not go to therapy, that everybody else in their life is like, I'm going to therapy because of you. They're stuck in pre-contemplation or contemplation. Rightfully so, they might be afraid.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Mellor, and welcome in to Growth Ready, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high-performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. On this episode, we welcome in Talia Bombola, an award-winning psychotherapist who believes that once we first explore where we find ourselves and with a willingness to rewrite our beliefs, we can ready ourselves to do the work necessary to grow and go and pursue our dreams. All right, welcome back into the most recent installment of Growth Ready. So excited to be sitting down today with Talia Bombola. I'm just realizing I never asked you how to pronounce your name. Did I nail it?
Yep.
Perfect. We're off to a great start. But Talia, before we go any further, I would love to just simply learn from you. What does it mean to you to be growth ready?
So being growth ready for me means having half part like growth mindset. So if there's an opportunity for growth, to already be looking at the world as an opportunity for, oh, I could do that, rather than being so shut out or having too much of a plan. And I think the other part off the cuff of what it means to be growth ready is being willing to be wrong about what you previously thought, or being willing to go with the flow if new information comes up that is a better fit, and not be so rigid and stuck to a plan.
Love it. And in so many ways, we are talking to an expert in terms of how to navigate the growth world that you live in, that is life, right? And so as we're going to go through this, we're going to continue to learn more and more about you, but just tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you're doing today.
Sure. So my name is Talia Bombola. I work as a licensed marriage family therapist, and then I'm also a relationship coach / mentor. I've never landed on a name that I like, but I'll just use those two for context for women, both in business and in love. And I got to where I am today because I had a transformative experience with my own therapy. I don't even know how many years ago. I was 12 when I started, so a very long time ago. And that therapist changed my life, and in many ways saved my life, because in middle school I went through I was confident and I was very smart, but I went to a small school that I think was the reason I ended up getting bullied, because I didn't fit in the way that I used to. And it was, again, very small. It was like 40 kids in the grade. So I needed help with adjusting to not having the friend group that I thought I had. And it was just nice to have somebody outside of my family, to have that person for an hour a week or more to talk to. And then adolescence was just, it got rougher from there. And I was like, wait, this is a career? Like this, I can do this, and people can feel better when they leave an office. And then since then, I've devoted pretty much my whole life in some way, shape, or form to educating. I've worked as a professor. I'm a supervisor also. I love giving back and love giving out information that people can grow and make themselves better. And again, as a therapist, having that space for someone to come in and be like, I'm so broken, I'm so unworthy, I'm whatever the narrative is about themselves, and to be able to rewire that. I think that's like the epitome of being growth ready. When my clients come in, sometimes they are begrudging and they don't love it. And they're like, you're a stranger, what do you know? And I'm like, I do, fair. I don't know a lot about you, but I do know a lot about the trade. So I'm happy to meet you in the middle. I think we're both experts. They're an expert on their life. I'm an expert in whatever I've studied. And I don't think anybody is in the power position at all. I think we have a lot to learn from our clients, and they have a lot to learn from us. And it really is a matter of meeting of the minds.
Gosh, so much already to unpack there. I'm also an avid fan of therapy. I don't know how else better way to put it. Yes. But I've been in it now for a little over 8 years. And what's funny about it is that I met my wife maybe 2 months after I started therapy.
Brilliant.
So she tells the world that there's the pre-Brittany and the post-Brittany, and I tell the world that there's the pre-therapy and the post-therapy. But again, you talk about, big in the middle somewhere. We will find a way to meet in the middle. It just depends who we get speaking to. But typically she'll just elbow me and say like, pre-Brittany, no,
Oh, you're like, excuse me, yes. Mike Bean, yes.
Right. But So much of your initial response, though, to the question around growth ready speaks to what it is you do now in the sense of understanding the opportunity. And sometimes we are ready, just like therapy. We're ready for the opportunity, but sometimes the opportunity just smacks us over the head. Same way therapy can somehow just come out of the blue. It's like, this is what we need right now. And every part of us says, we are not ready. We don't want this right now. And I'm curious, when you just think about the work that you're doing today, what does that process look like when someone says, hey, I understand this is what I need right now, but in no way am I ready for this right now?
Mm-hmm. So whether it's in the therapy office or like coaching clients or people I just meet out in the world, and they're like, I usually don't lead with I'm a therapist, because then they tell me like all of their trauma in chronological order. And I'm like, no, I misspoke. I'm a therapist. I'm not your therapist. There's no card on file. Like, this is not a session. So I usually just stick with like supervisor, professor, because nobody's in a good way curious about that. They're like, oh, that's cool. And then they move on. So when I meet people and they're not ready, what is I think an important theory to bring up is the stages of change model. And this is when you're making, like you said, sometimes change arrives in our lap, whether we like it or not. This model doesn't necessarily translate directly onto that kind of change where it's thrust upon you and you have no choice. That's more like radical acceptance. You're in survival mode. You just have to get by. This model would be for if you're making a conscious change, and most people start in pre-contemplation, which is, I don't even know that there's a problem. So like cigarettes are a pretty striking example. It's like, I'm smoking 3 packs a day. Clearly that's a lot. But in pre-contemplation, I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have a problem. And then eventually enough people mention it or health questions come up, and then you go into contemplation, which would be maybe 3 is a lot. But it might just end there. That's the only posit or curiosity you have. Then it goes into preparation, where you're like, okay, I definitely think 3 packs is too much. Let me see what I can do to prepare and to have this. So you're going from pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then you actually move into action. So once I've prepared, yes, I know it's a lot. This is what I'm going to be doing and the steps I'm going to be taking. Here's how I'm going to prevent a relapse. All of that occurs when you're kind of preparing. Then in action, you're actively trying to quit, or you have quit. Then you reach a phase called maintenance, where the problem is no longer the problem. You maintaining the quote unquote sobriety from the problem is. And then relapse is a part of the stages of change, because it would be unreasonable for some changes to expect full sobriety, because like in an unhealthy relationship, or even with the cigarettes example, you're out, you're on a European trip and you're enjoying the moment and you smell one, you're like, oh my gosh, it's just like college when I used to smoke. And you have 1 cigarette because you're on a vacation and that's it. And you don't buy another pack. Technically, could it be a relapse? Yes, but you've also maintained the change for so long. It's more like revisiting, like nostalgia. So it depends on what stage of change the person comes in at. Usually for therapy, people are like, my life's a mess. I need help. They're like ready to take action. Sometimes they're unprepared for what it's going to take, but we work together to get them prepared to act. And then there's other people, usually the people who need therapy the most, that do not go to therapy, that everybody else in their life is like, I'm going to therapy because of you. They're stuck in pre-contemplation or contemplation. Rightfully so. They might be afraid. They may be the first person in their family who's ever done this, not just therapy, but like made a change. That could be positive too. Gone to college, moved out of the family house, saved up enough money to not be financially dependent. You name the change. It doesn't mean just because it's positive, we're only excited about it and we only have good feelings. Grief can come from a loss of independence. Like I think you mentioned off air, you have kids, I have kids. That was a grieving process in many ways. It was so exciting because there's this new life, but then I'm not just me anymore. I'm not the career-driven woman. My hours are going to change. Now I love it and I've settled into it. But if you had asked me a year ago, I would have been a mess. Like grief can come in both positive and negative. So that I think that's part of, I would add that to like the stages of change too, is like preparing to have your stuff rocked, because you're coming up again, what identity shift you're going to have. That's, I think, a key part of change too, is preparing. Not only, I don't want to be somebody who, let's say, smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, but what am I going to do and who am I going to be when I'm somebody who doesn't smoke at all? What is my lifestyle pattern going to look like? What am I going to do on my breaks at work instead? What am I going to do when I'm out at a concert and somebody offers me one? Like, you have to really think full picture to be able to maintain that change. I know that was long-winded, so I apologize, but I hope it answered your question.
Never apologize for
Okay,
detail, because I mean,
cool.
that is, I think, as you were speaking, I was like, okay, I wonder where our audience falls into this. Because I think as you're speaking, I'm thinking a lot of people are probably in contemplation that listen to this podcast. They come here already with a curiosity, or with an appetite change, and they struggle with this. Okay, give me some steps here, Talia. Give me that next. What do I do when I know this? Now, what do I do? And I think about my own growth journey as you're speaking to this. How many years I went just ignoring signs, just ignoring so many signs that, I started this business of mine 3 years ago. And again, use my wife. I love referring to her, not necessarily in the most positive light every time. Here we are, but I don't think she's that avid a listener anyway to the show, so it's all good. But she takes great pleasure in reminding me how much I spoke about making the commitment that I eventually made 3 years ago for the years leading up to it.
Yep.
And how she would bring my attention to certain things. If it's like, hey, do you not see that this is what you could be doing as opposed to what you are doing?
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is, how do I get to a place of saying, hey, I hear what you're saying and what you know is good for me, but I'm not ready to hear that yet. I'm not ready for you to tell me what I need. I don't need your prescription. And now that I do what I do as an executive coach, I understand the power in helping someone discover that for themselves. Being able to say like, hey, I already know where this is going, but by me telling you, I'm actually going to affect the ability for it to be an impactful awareness when it does come. I'm curious, when you think about the work that you're doing now, how do you resist that temptation to maybe say, hey, listen, this is what you need to know, or this is what you need to do? Because I know in therapy, it's a little different, right?
Yes.
I think people are technically paying you to tell you that.
Like, please just write my life. Yeah.
Right. Tell me what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And tell me what I'm doing wrong, more
Yes.
seriously. But I'm just curious, like, when you look at the way in which people have successfully grown under your mentorship, what has that process looked like to sort of bring the horse to water, if you will?
Yes. Really apt analogy, metaphor. I can never get those straight. The reference to that, you sometimes can bring a horse to water and they're parched, and the horse is like, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have water? And you're like, it's right there. And it's like, oh, but it's so far. And there's all these excuses for it. It's like, we're in the middle of the Sahara. This is the closest you're going to get. Drink the water. And they're like, oh, but it's, again, excuses. So for me and the people that I mentor and who are under that, I think guidance could be a word, to allow them space to still explore the current life that they have before it changes into the life they want it to be, and asking them pointed, insightful, and specific questions. Who do you think you'll become if you don't change your life? And then who do you think you'll become if you do change your life? Or in relationships, I work with quite a few people who are struggling. Do I stay? Do I go? Is this the right relationship for me? It was so good in the beginning, which was 5 years ago, but the last 3 have been terrible. They're really holding on to the past in some way and hoping it comes true again, which is just scientifically not going to happen, because how we show up in the beginning of a relationship isn't how we are the whole time. And there's phases of love which take a commitment, right? And so not everybody who wants a committed relationship is ready to go the distance, because they're like, oh no, I'll do it when it's easy. But if, like, we have to talk about our feelings or in-laws or any sort of thing that could be a conflict, I'm out. Well, that's not an authentic relationship. So when I'm working with those people who are, I want to grow and I want to change, and my partner doesn't, they don't like listening to podcasts, they don't like reading books, they just are happy sitting on the couch or outside in the garden, I love sitting on the couch too, but I couldn't do that all the time. I would need to move, go to the gym, go be on the sunshine. And I couldn't be with somebody who was so opposite to that. Of course, we can all have days to ourselves to rest, but it's asking those people in that stuck place, if you stay in this relationship, who will you be? And if you stay, who will you not become? And those are the questions we usually spend at least a couple of months, which is like 3 to 4 sessions, depending on however long we're working together, maybe 6 to 8 sessions on exploring that. And then once they have that existential exploration complete, they've usually already started noticing changes in their day-to-day life. And it helps them to understand, oh, I had to be ready to explore that and pinpoint verbally what I was going to let go or what I was going to foreclose on being able to become if I stayed. And relationship could be romantic. It could be in a job. It could be in a friendship. I use it as interchangeably with like moments of relating, or like who you're relating to. It doesn't necessarily only mean romantic.
I love that. And that really helps frame it as well. potentially from a personal standpoint to that relationship with yourself. How do you relate to yourself? I think that's super helpful. And that notion of exploring where you are first, again, we're in this point in history where people don't do well with saying, well, wait, that means I'm going to have to be patient. I'm going to have to take some time. I'm going to have to reflect. I'm going to have to maybe take a step or two backward before we go forwards.
Right, right.
Even just in the last couple of weeks, I got a phone call from someone. I couldn't believe I was actually being asked this question. It was like, are you one of these coaches that are going to help me get to $100,000 in 6 weeks? I said, no, I'm a good coach.
Yeah.
It's just, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, this is how some of our minds think. And when we think about that pre-contemplation phase, it's almost like an inability to see the reality, right? It's that, hey, I don't want to see reality for what it is. I don't want to see the work that I have to do for what it is. Mm-hmm. Instead, I would rather just be comfortable here, not having to deal with the change.
Yeah, it's almost synonymous with being in denial. So that you don't believe, not only do you not believe your behavior is a problem, you definitely don't believe that it's the cause of the results in your life that are negative. So there's no need to change in the first place. And the problem isn't usually even discussed, and it might be ignored entirely because it's hidden. It's tucked away in your subconscious. It's not about growth at that point. It's about, how do I maintain, even if I'm miserable, because I'm so afraid of change, I'll deny that I need to, and I'll deny that if I did change, it would actually be good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. I really want to learn this more about your journey now, just obviously being respectful to what obviously you're comfortable sharing. And when you think about just how therapy impacted you, and you spoke to that therapist being the person that changed your life, what was some of that initial, I guess, growth that you were able to discover just by simply pressing pause and maybe creating that better relationship with yourself?
Yes. Well, we have time. I can go back. So I would say in the beginning, the growth that I was needing to move through was understanding how to grow my own self-esteem and my own self-worth independent of the validation of others. And as a teenage girl, especially growing up in Orange County, it's very looks-based, it's very monetary-based, and that was not the looks, meaning like material items. Yeah. That was not where my family economically fit in, and we struggled, I would say, more than we grew in those formative years around middle school. So it was working with a lot of how do I navigate family conflict, because there was concerns about money, or my parents would be arguing about it. And it was never about their relationship. It was more the external stressors they were going through. But when you're that young, this is me in retrospect, when you're that young, you don't know it's that, you think it's your own fault, basically. So it was working through not taking accountability and ownership for what was going on with my parents, and working through the social problems that I was having. So that was kind of the first chapter of therapy. And then when I moved to college, I had a nervous breakdown. So I was in a totally different kind of therapy. I went from nervous in middle school for one reason, and then I had a really rare disease when I was in high school and I almost died. I was in the ICU for a month. And after that, teenagers already think they're invincible. I took it to the next level, and I ended up going to drug and alcohol treatment halfway through my freshman year of high school. So again, different kind of therapy. And that the teacher that was in that program was she needs to go into a different school. She wasn't doing this because she doesn't have another option. She needs to get back on the right track. So I went from really not doing well to doing so well. I was at this teetering point, and that's when I eventually went to college, a year or two. I went to high school for 2.5 years. Then I went to college. So I was already young, but the pressure that I put myself under to be an achiever and don't look back, and nobody's ever going to guess you ever had problems if you're the best at everything. And I burnt myself out. Then I transferred to UCLA, and within 2 weeks, I had a nervous breakdown. And I was in the counselor's office, and I was like, I'm not going to do it, but I do think this is the point some people reach where they want to die. And I don't want that, but I'm so stressed. I don't know an alternate. Help. And it was this trainee. And now I understand because I've been through the levels. She was a new therapist. She was probably oh my gosh, please don't do anything. And she's like, I'm just going to go call my supervisor super quick. Wait here. I'm going to leave the door open. Don't do anything. I'll be right back. And she came in. My parents came to pick me up. I ended up getting on anxiety meds, which I totally needed. I had no clue. I mean, looking back, I obviously had anxiety growing up, but it was just not treated properly. once I got that and the right therapy for that time of my life, then the growth became, how do I manage my own anxiety? How do I manage interpersonal relationships? College was a lot about, living with roommates for the first time. I was lucky enough growing up to have my own room. I shared a bathroom, but my brother's really clean. So I never had conflict around that growing up. It was the first time I ever had that was in college. And then the season came for me to go to grad school. Then therapy became about leaving a toxic relationship and understanding how much influence your parents have on your psyche. And then after I left that therapy, when I was in it, became about, how do I do this in business, or how do I make this amount of money? How can I be somebody who doesn't have a scarcity mindset? And I have a business coach for that too. And then therapy has turned into, again, leaving. So I'm not with my kid's dad anymore, and couples therapy, and that my individual therapy helped me to learn, much like the clients I've worked with, like, it's just, there can be a time and a season for things, but the longer you hold on to something that clearly isn't healthy, if the other person doesn't want to grow. He was not in therapy. He started since we split up, which I think is really great for him. And now that we have a kid, that's the best thing for her. I really want him to go to therapy and learn everything he can from it and be a better person. And if he ends up with another person someday, that's what I work on in my individual too. Like, that will be great. I've just been through too much. I couldn't see it. So even if he did grow and change, I'd be like, but remember those, I just couldn't allow it. And that's another piece of therapy that I think a lot of people don't understand, or in the relationship counseling that I do, that being that growth ready, the other person that you were with for so long, even if it is an unhealthy relationship, they may change, not guarantee. They may actually do the work when you leave, when you're not breathing down their neck of like, you have to read this book, you have to do this podcast, like, we need to grow together. The person's like feeling gently bullied and they're like, I just like my blissful life of ignorance. I don't want to think about my family or whatever. Like, and of course, having done this since I was 12, I'm like, this is basic, rudimentary, but it's not. And I had to check myself on that too, in my ego in therapy, that not everybody wants to grow, and not everybody that knows they should, in quotes, can do it. Maybe for lack of resources, maybe they haven't had a good fit for a therapist, or maybe it would cost them too much. Can't tell you how many clients I've had, not monetary cost. They still live with their family, or they're still really close with their family, or they have a certain friend group or a certain job. And if they went to therapy or treatment, all that would go away. They'd have to set boundaries with their family. They might go to a different friend group. They might not have the same job. And that's too much change at once. That's like a whole infrastructure. So to avoid that, they just live in blissful ignorance.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
gosh, the reason why I asked you to actually go back
Yeah.
in the beginning is that clearly you were able to identify and focus on some of these, blind spots like any teenager would have.
Yes. Yeah.
But here I am, I'll be 40 next year. I work with
Wouldn't
a bunch of people, work with a bunch of people, either age,
have-
either side of my age. And we're still not seeing these things, folks. We're still not noticing some of these blind spots about ourselves. And it just doesn't go away until it's given the attention it deserves. I was just making a list as you were talking: self-esteem, anxiety, challenges, handling success, relationships, conflict, scarcity mindset. Like, don't tell me you're listening to this right now and not hearing yourself in some way, shape, or form. And if you're not, congratulations, you're in the 0.0001%.
Yes.
But you must be hearing yourself a little bit in some of this. And then the question becomes, to your point, you therefore need the help, but at the same time, do you want the help, and are you ready for the help? And that's so funny that you're even illustrating it this way, because this is when I speak when I do keynotes and speak to leaders. I talk about leadership through this lens too. Like, we all know when we're in a certain position, we're supposed to lead.
Right.
Doesn't mean we want to.
True.
When we choose to want to, we can actually work on getting ready to lead.
Yes.
And it's the same thing with this growth stuff too, is that, hey, if we're really ready to grow, then it means that at some point we've become aware of one of these things, and we've now done the work just to simply say, okay, now it's time.
Yes.
Now it's time to sit down and really see how prominent this aspect of myself is actually playing within my life, right?
And the recognition, if you had asked me a year ago, or even a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have foresaw what ended up happening in terms of like my shift in my family system, being a single parent. I wouldn't have guessed it. But there were elements that I look back on my own therapy notes in my journal that I'm like, not entirely shocked. Didn't love it, but it wasn't a total out of left field. I think for people who look back and they're like, how could this have happened? What what the key is, it's not about shaming yourself or blaming yourself. It's looking back and going, was there, if I'm really being honest, was there any inkling this was actually a possibility? And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of honesty, which not everybody has with themselves or others naturally. It took a lot of work, the years leading up to it, for me to be like, no, that tracks. Like, this thing that bothered me ended up turning into this thing, this red flag I overlooked because I thought this was happening. Because naturally, instinctually as humans, this is separate from being a therapist, but it is amplified no matter how much we learn in our conscious brain. If your subconscious isn't on board with it, you could read literally every book and podcast on how to have a healthy relationship. But if your subconscious template from your childhood with watching your parents have a relationship is unhealthy, unsafe, toxic, power dynamic, you name it, that's what you're going to be working towards. Your conscious brain and your subconscious don't really talk to each other unless you're in certain kinds of therapy or hypnotherapy, and you're more susceptible to have that as a suggestion of like, you could have a healthy relationship. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I could. But now that your subconscious is on board, all that you've learned consciously can actually come to fruition. So if you look back honestly and ask yourself, did I contribute to this? Even the person who called you, like, am I going to get to 100K in 6 weeks? It's like, I mean, yeah, how ethical do you want to be? OnlyFans is a thing, right? Like, no knock on that, but like people, oh no, I don't want to do that. Okay, well, if you say you're really ready to do anything to make it happen, that's a lie. Like, I'm willing to make 100K in 6 weeks, but I don't want to work more than I already do. I don't want to have to do this. I don't want to. We don't know what's going to be asked of you, but I can guarantee, because your mind is already limiting yourself, you're cutting off certain opportunities for teaching. So with teaching, I took a break after I had my daughter because I also didn't want to have to go back in person and the germs, whatever. But I miss teaching so much, and I've had it, pulled up to apply to other community colleges. And then the night before, I kid you not, I got a message the next morning, but the night before I was like, okay, let me look at other jobs for this because I didn't want to go back full time. And I was like, you know what? We'll just see what happens. I woke up the next morning to a woman who's like, we met like I've known her for longer. She's like, we met at that event. You mentioned you wanted to be a supervisor. I'm curious if that's still on the table for you. Like, here's an offer. And I was just like, what? Like, now I get to teach, not in the way of college, but I get to teach other baby therapists who are learning to be therapists, and in a much cooler role that's more flexible, way more my speed with where I'm at in my life. Had I been so hell-bent on holding on to, no, but I was a professor and I taught 8:35 to 10 a.m. 4 days a week, like, that's not my lifestyle anymore. And I had to be willing to let that age or era of myself go to welcome in that new change. And so for clients or people who are listening to this, that they're asking themselves like, okay, what is this next piece? You have to be having radical honesty with yourself and take accountability for both the growth and the demise of relationships that you have or have had. And you have to be willing to take a look at, this could look different. What is the core desire that you're after? And then be open to the universe if you're cool with that. Like one of my colleagues calls it GUS, God, Universe, Spirit. So it kind of covers all the metaphysical planes, what you're at religious, spiritual, like let it go to GUS, like whatever you're into, and then let the universe show you, right? I wanted to teach. I put it out there. I wouldn't have thought supervisor, but it was the best fit for me. So it's being in your truth and knowing what you want, and of course what you're not willing to tolerate, and being open to how that could happen. So it's, again, that 100K coaching client, if you ask them, it's like, okay, well, you could just, sell nude pictures of yourself online. They're like, no, I'm not going to debase myself to that. And it's like, okay, well, then it might not be 100,000 in 6 weeks, or you feel ethically icky and you just teach a course on how to make 100K and it's photoshopping your sales and revenue and then making Instagram ads from it. And that's how you get your money. Like, yeah.
Right. And so much of what we're talking about here is it's getting so fixated on the outcome that you want.
Yes.
You're not actually taking the time to say, well, one, where am I at right now? Two, what am I willing to do about it?
Right.
And again, that 100K example, that's what I cannot, when someone comes to me, and I've done enough work on my business and myself now to know this, when someone comes to me and all they want to do is talk about outcomes, I already know this isn't a good fit. I'm not your coach. It's just that simple. If you tell me about what you're feeling and what's been going on and what the frustrations have been and where you feel as though you could have been better, and when you had that appetite, and true intrigue, like, hey, I would love to figure out firstly how I've gone wrong or how I could have been better in the past before we even start talking about the future. And those are two super different mindsets. And that's a spectrum in itself. There's all sorts of people across that entire spectrum. But where I'm kind of going here is like when you put it in that desire state, to say like, hey, what do I desire? it immediately puts that emphasis back on where you started here, in the sense of, if you're not willing to actually take the time to look at what's going on right now,
Right.
you can't actually define why it is that's even a desire in the first place. You don't really know what you want
No.
until you actually do that work in the present.
Why do you need $100,000? I'm in debt, and well, then you're not responsible with money, and money's never going to show up. If money is a real person and you have a real relationship with money, which I believe that, why the heck would it be like, you're so irresponsible, you just blew through the last 100K? I'm not showing up for you in your bank account. I'm not safe to show up. Why do you need them? Why I saw it on Instagram and I thought it would be cool. No, next. I really have this desire that if I raise this amount of money, then I'll be able to donate, right? Like, it's more of a well thought out plan. Okay, maybe not 6 weeks. We're going to have to flex on the timeline, but you are giving the desire that you are actually wanting a purpose and a job. And when it comes to money, then it will start showing up. But you're not going to be good at making money or holding large amounts of money if you're spending all of it and not good at having money. The key is the having of money. A lot of people will get this huge cash injection, and then the next month they're like, where did it go? It's because they were back on all these bills, or they had a leak, or they weren't steady in their nervous system with the abundance mindset. And the universe was like, yeah, it was nice, but you can't hold it. So getting good at having self-esteem, having money, having self-worth, having confidence is going to cost people relationships. Well, you want people come to me for dating coaching, and I'm like pretty ruthless when it comes to dating coaching, and people are like, well, I want this, and that, but I'm not willing to put up with X, Y, and Z, and I want it in this amount of time for this. And I was like, there are no guarantees. That would be weird. I said, you can be in a relationship tomorrow. You have to settle. They're like, what? And I'm like, that's available. That's an available option to anyone. So I've cut this out of, I just want to be in a relationship. No, you don't. No, you don't. You can go ask the guy at your grocery store who bags your groceries. Let's date. And I'm sure he would say yes. Well, let's get clear. What is the actual, very specific, thought out, not necessarily outcome, but like, in that sense, desire for a relationship? I want a life partner, I want a companion, or I just want somebody to go to dinner with once a month. What's the purpose of the desire? And then getting clear on that, not so much tied to how it actually looks, but what the purpose of it makes you clearer, then the universe delivers more often than not. And if it doesn't, it's not the right time. And we cannot force something into a timeline that is not the right time, because eventually it will become so unhealthy or so unsustainable, you have no choice but to leave. It will be served to you in such an uncomfortable way that it will smack you in the face and say to you, this is enough. This is not for you. I told you to cut it out. And then you'll have no choice but to be like, okay, I understand. I'm leaving the job, or I'm leaving the relationship, or whatever else. And in my past relationship, the most recent one, I don't regret it at all. It taught me a ton. It taught me I should have stayed firm on my boundaries in some areas, but I was pregnant and hormonal. I should have stayed firm on this, but I have reasons for why I didn't. And now I have an amazing daughter out of it. I would never go back and undo that. The nights of heartache were terrible, but I lived. Like, at the end of the day, at the end of this, year, she's almost a year old, I survived, and I will have the rest of my life to enjoy with her. And that is a phenomenal gift. Was it shitty? I mean, sorry, I don't know if I can curse. Was it terrible? Okay. Was it shitty? Okay. Okay. It was a shitty path to get there, but it taught me a lot about myself, and it led me to this feeling of wholeness and completion. So I didn't even know if I could get pregnant. My results were that I was going to be infertile. And then talk about miracle surprise baby. It was like a total 180. So I was like going into therapy at the beginning of 2023 for grieving the loss of if I could ever be a mom, because I was such a workaholic. My cortisol was through the roof. Like, it was so uninhabitable. It was like Antarctica. Like, nothing was going in. There's nothing happening. And I was like, okay, I have to go to therapy to understand that's just not on my path. And then, I kid you not, 6 to 7 weeks into starting therapy, I had already started a different medicine for infertility. And I was like, I'm so nauseous. So it's a side effect. I was like 2 or 3 months pregnant at this point. Had no clue. And I was just like, I told my therapist, and she was like, isn't that so wild how your preconscious knew, though? Like, you reached out to tackle motherhood. Could it happen? Could it not happen? What do I want it to look like? What do I want it to not look like? My preconscious had already planted the seed that was going to be birthed, and eventually did. And I'm glad I did that identity work, because I was so much more ahead once she was actually here. I did still have postpartum, but that transformative journey, it's like when you want the 5-figure, 6-figure, 7-figure business, when you've done the work to attune to your nervous system, when the day what you've wanted arrives, then you're not as shaken by like, oh my gosh, I forgot I wasn't going to, I read all those books. I read How to Not Hate Your Husband After Kids. I read Motherhood, Marriage, and the Modern Dilemma, Working Moms, Being There. Like I read all the books to prep for it. Like it is the most important thing you'll ever do is raise somebody else's psyche. And there's not a day that goes by now. Like it's tough at times, but I'm like, I am the most prepared for this because I took it so seriously that if it's easier than that, great. I'd rather over prepare for this than under prepare. And that was a huge identity shift that, again, when you're open and available for what the universe has in store for you or Gus has in store for you and you're open, then you can actually see a lot of your desires, even that you didn't know was a desire, come to fruition. That's the coolest part of when you've done the work to regulate your nervous system and be open to grow.
Preach, preach.
Yeah.
And again, it's beautiful to speak to people who can actually put science to this, because for me personally, that's where I am now. That's where I am now. I'm at a point with my business where I get to look at the success of it and how it's grown. It's not a surprise. And it was so thought out and so much work went into what does it mean to have a business, operate a business that is as established as mine is now. And again, I don't say this to sort of get attaboys, high fives, or say, Steve, it's more just to align with your point of just when we do that work on the front end and we really get clear on I love how you make it about having, like, what do you want to have and how do you actually do the work to understand what comes with that? Because something that you came through in that story there was the comfort level that you had with the sacrifice that comes with what it was that you wanted. And to speak to becoming a mom and understanding the sacrifices that would come with that. And you spoke to some of those tough times and late at nights and all this kind of thing. Again, people, as you listen to this, you're hearing yourself on your journey too. It may not be a relationship that you've had as a parent or with a spouse or whatever it may be. It may be with that job. It may be with that career. It may be with that idea for a business. It may just simply be with yourself. And just to be able to actually stop and say, what do I want to have? Why do I want to have it? And to really do the work around that. Because for me, Talia, that's what I'm hearing here is like the more we're willing to do that work around the have,
yes,
things start to just kind of fall into place in this thing that we call life.
Mm-hmm. And when you recognize, it's kind of both ends of the spectrum. If you're looking at your life of, okay, what do I have? And you're miserable with it, but you keep having it or holding on to it because you think it'll eventually turn into something either that used to exist or you've fantasized like, well, we just have to get through these 900, side quests and then we'll end up at this thing. I look back to, in the business, there was many times that I had an abundance of clients. I had at the right season, especially during what happened during the pandemic, a lot of families were struggling and they needed more therapy. I was working an insane amount of hours. I had time for work and self-care and that was it. And then I would come home and I'm just like, I can't do this forever. And this other voice kind of would come in my head of like, it's a season. So I would always learn to just ride the waves and ride the seasons. And it's about what did I have then? I don't have that now. But because I had that back then and I made smart investments and I made smart connections socially, I have other opportunities for a supervisor job or I have other opportunities for podcasts. So it's really all about appreciating what you have currently. And then if it's not the season for it anymore, allowing it to leave and be open. It's okay to have that weird gaping feeling of like, oh, but I don't have, it's okay. It's the image of, but I really don't want to let this go. And Gus is like, okay, but you have no clue what I have in store for you after this. So if you're not open to what you currently have and letting it go, that's where I got in my relationship too. I was like, I don't like what we have anymore. I haven't liked it for quite some time. It was terrible timing going through that while I was pregnant. But I think if anybody can get through grieving the loss of the relationship while you're about to give birth and being pregnant and then getting through the first year by yourself, like, I feel like anybody can make that. Like if you can put yourself in that of like, okay, this lady survived that. And like you said, it's not for kudos, but it's like, that's like really shitty to have to go through. And the fact that I survived it, I'm like, oh, I could get through anything. Like if I had or have had to go through that, nothing else, everything else is going to be a cakewalk. And to prepare the difference that I think he and I did not see. And that's where I was really like, I can't have this relationship anymore. Not only can I not be in it, I couldn't be my full self. I asked myself the same questions I asked my clients. I was like, this is going to cost me everything. This is going to cost me my happiness, my sanity, who I want to grow into, who I want to model it's okay to be with for my, like, I don't want to have this anymore. And I think those moments, those pivotal moments where it was just like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this. And it was the one session I had with the couples therapist. And I feel like I was 14 years old sitting on her couch when I said this. She was asking whatever question it was, hit me right in the subconscious. And I said, it feels like I don't have enough self-worth to leave somebody who's treating me this way. And I was like, ew, no, like that is so not the vibe that I'm in. Like, how old was I when I just responded to that? And it made me realize, like, the longer I tried to have what I thought it was, the more I was blind to seeing what it actually was. Well, it's this, and we kind of talk over it. Or people that are, big spenders, they don't have the bank account for it, but they have the lifestyle for it, and they have the lifestyle creep. It will catch up to you eventually, and usually at a time where you literally have no other choice but to make a change. That is not the only available option to make a change. People can choose to put themselves into contemplation and preparation by their own volition if they understand that it could cost them everything. I'm happier and less stressed out now as a single parent than I was when I was in a relationship. That is not always the case for other people, but that took me to getting to that point of like, I'd rather have this than that. Or in my business now, I have a very small private practice. I love being a supervisor, and then I do podcasts. That's my speed right now while she's young. I would much rather have this than the work schedule and all the money I was making. I would make upwards of like 20 or 30 grand a few years ago a month. I was making an insane amount of money doing my craft, loving it, giving back, donating time, whatever, you name it, that was in my season. I can't have that anymore because it would cost me her childhood, and I'm not going to put anything ever in the way of that. And those first 3 years, you never get back. That's when the psyche develops. Being there in those first 3 years is the most important. And it kind of brings us full circle to why so many people struggle with change or struggle with what they're going through in their life. In my view, as a therapist trained with psychoanalysis, it all goes back to your infancy and childhood. Were your parents there for you? Did they meet your needs, or did they miss your needs? Did they shove you in a corner when you were emotional and say to figure it out? Did they work a ton and they were never with you, so you didn't have that emotional refueling? Like, a lot of the struggles that adults have really do tap back into childhood and infancy, even if we can't remember it. That's why I love what I do, because I'm like a living testament to it. Just because I have training in this doesn't make me exempt from having shit happen to me in my life. Like, we're not perfect. You don't go to grad school and you're like absolved. Yeah.
But it's one of my favorite things to say to people is like, here I am, I'm an executive coach. And
Right.
one of my biggest call outs for anyone that coaches now, I'm like, do you have a coach? And they say no. I'm like, then you're full of it.
Yep.
I'm sorry, but
100%.
you cannot stand, and I come from the water sport.
Yep.
It's my biggest issue in that world is that it's like you get to a certain point and you no longer need to learn. You no longer need to have a coach over you or anything like that. That's another podcast. That's another time.
Yeah,
So,
true.
I've been working on that stuff for a few years now.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it's like so much of what you're talking to here. I love this term season. It's a term that I use myself, is that this ability to change, if we can just acknowledge that the season that we're in right now can be different if we want it to be. If it's not the right time, then it's not the right time. But just know that that next season, that new season, however you want to put it, it's there when you want it. It's there when you want it. And I do want to touch on this before we wrap up is
Sure.
when we did the first question, you talked about the willingness to be wrong. And we talked so much about almost the pre-decision in many ways throughout this, which I love it because, again, I think so many people listening to this, it's the decisiveness of growth that we probably get stuck with the most.
True.
But then we're brave enough and we're bold enough to make the decision. We make the change and we get something wrong. And then we get something else wrong. And then we get something else wrong. And we keep piling up all these mistakes. And then maybe we even start to question things. So I'd love to really get some insight from you around when you think about the ways in which we can handle getting things wrong.
Yes. Tolerating the discomfort of being wrong. Yes. I think learning to separate, like the definition of failure in one of the lines in the dictionary, I'm a nerd when it comes to this. It's an unsuccessful attempt at something. I'm paraphrasing, but that's again the gist. That's the key to remember. It's not, you don't open up failure in the dictionary, it's your face. Like, that would be really confronting. You open up and it says it's an unsuccessful attempt. Great. You can make more successful attempts. The Wright brothers did not figure out flight the first time. Benjamin Franklin did not figure out the light bulb the first time, or Thomas Edison, whoever. Like, these things take time. It's not just a one and done. It's more rare that somebody is an expert or brilliant at something in sports. It's not like the first time you hit the ball or kick the ball, it's going to be Lionel Messi. Like, there's going to be time for growth. And learning that failure doesn't mean you are a failure. It means this attempt was unsuccessful. I can't quit now because the next one might be it. The next one might be it. This one was it. And then in another season of your life, it's, wow, this is going really easy. And that's, don't get duped. It's, what is this trying to teach me? What is this trying to temper me up and build me up to? Because what if it's not so easy one day, right? In business, I hit it big very quickly, very easily, but it wasn't that easy when I think about all the money I had invested in a good way into my coach to help me not have a scarcity mindset. I was successful because I taught my nervous system how to have money. I could have made all that money and it could have been gone. I could have been having an overspending problem and I'd have nothing to show for it. Thank goodness that's not the case. When you think of your life, if you're listening to this, of like, how do I tolerate being wrong about something? I made the wrong job choice. I made the wrong investment in whatever it might be. There's two pieces I think that I'd like the listeners to take away. There's time as it's defined in chronological time. So like as the clock goes, and then there's kairos, which is a Greek word. It's that felt sense of time. So if you sit with somebody for an hour, there's clients I have, I'm sure it's mutual at certain times. They're like, oh my gosh, that hour flew by quickly. That kairos felt sense of time. It's an hour either way. It's chronologically an hour, but kairos felt sense of time. It could fly by, or it could feel like I'm at the dentist. I love the dentist, but like the example of like they're pulling your teeth out, right? Like it could be draining. So understanding that wrong or that failure piece, it's one unsuccessful attempt. Don't sit there and belabor the point and make yourself feel like shit and beat yourself up for hours or years. Move on. And I'm not saying move on flippantly. It's like you literally have no choice but to move on from it because you're robbing yourself and others of other successful attempts that you could be having. So don't get so stuck in, I made a wrong decision once. Okay, well, I would still be married miserably and model for my daughter. Like, no, I made the wrong decision. They were the right person for the right time. We clearly have a kid together. So there was some ulterior path that I was not made aware of, that was my job to bring her into the world. That's what I believe. And I wasn't going to keep making the wrong decision. It felt wrong. It wasn't right. The more I tried, the worse it got. Like, that's the wrong decision. And a decision is an instant. It's either you do it or you don't, or you make it or you do. It's a yes or a no. Sitting in indecision or feeling indecisive, if you're tuning into your gut and it is saying, wait, not now, not yet, that's when not making the decision is the right decision. However, if you know in all of your gut senses that it's the right decision, right for you, and you're delaying it, well, what ifing yourself? What if is anxiety. What is the reality of it. And it's normal to ask yourself, what if? Get a piece of paper out, write it down. Pros and cons to this decision. What if this happens? Have a contingency plan. Make your fears real, tackle them, and then go make the decision. And if, guess what, you need to make a different one, minus a few things in life, that option is available to you. Like, there's very few decisions that you can make that are incredibly, you cannot take them back or they're totally permanent. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 off the top of my head. The rest of them might be a lot of investment of time, energy, whatever the resource is. It might be costly, but it's not completely undoable. So it's better to make the decision after you've thought about it, not be flippant, and go back and be like, I was wrong. I'm willing to admit I was wrong. I didn't have all the information I have now about it. If I had all this then, I wouldn't have made it. Okay, so make that new one now and move on. Keep that space going in your life to make those new decisions, and don't get so stuck on being a failure, being wrong, or giving one care what other people in the world think about what you have done. They are not living your life. If you wouldn't have their life, don't take their advice. That's other advice that I give. And who cares? Everybody is so worried. Every teen I work with, social anxiety, but then I'm going to walk in and they're going to be looking at me. I was like, oh my God, what do you think they're going to be thinking about? And they're like, probably what they're wearing. And I'm like, so they're going to be thinking about themselves and you're going to be thinking about yourself. So probably nobody's going to be thinking about other people, and everybody's going to be so worried about their own stuff. They're not going to look at you. And she was like, oh yeah. Oh, you're right. Right. That's the gift of confidence, self-worth, and not having anxiety, is like, have your blinders on, stay in your lane. You can look to others for inspiration, but don't look to others for competition. They have 100,000 in 6 weeks. Who knows how they got it? Who knows? If they got it by doing something completely against your morals, you wouldn't want it anyway. So don't compare, because you don't know that.
Right.
Yes.
There's the notion of the attempt is
Right.
where we we can really help ourselves simply because we immediately frame it as the process as opposed to the actual result.
Right.
The attempt is the effort, it's the energy, it's the time,
Mm-hmm.
it's the whatever, it's whatever you did to get the result.
Right.
If you focus on the result, then you're probably not going to pick yourself back up and do it again. If you focus on the attempt, then you actually have a ton of stuff to learn and actually apply and figure out next time around and do it better, whether it be a relationship, whether it be a step in your process with your career, whatever it might be. Something else that you mentioned there, the what if versus the what is. I have this sort of exercise that I do with folks that whenever I hear the what if come through more than maybe twice in the middle of a conversation, I immediately force them in that moment to get present and get in the room. And for me, I think that's something that if you are someone that does well with being present, there's going to be always someone in the room with you that is not, someone who's struggling with anxiety. So if we do have leaders listening to this episode, I empower you just to sort of pay attention to the what if mindset, the what if language, because you can serve someone just by saying, listen, you're not in the room right now. Whatever you're talking about is the fiction of your imagination. It's not actually real.
No.
It's just this idea. And so the more we can actually step into the what is, then suddenly now it's like, oh, okay, so what is going on right now? And typically what I love about that, Talia, is whenever I force and challenge somebody to get in the room, it takes them a while to actually identify what's going on. They're so focused on what's not.
The fear, I don't want to fail. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's incredible. It's like, just tell me what's going on right now. And it's just silence. And I'm like, okay, look, this is how distracted you are by the what if, by the anxiety, by the potential outcome.
And if you're only focused on failing, I mean, the subconscious mind doesn't process no or don't. We've seen this when we work with little kids because their preconscious is still forming. Don't put this there. Don't do that. And they keep doing it. And we're like, what did I say? Don't do that. Because as an adult, I mean, some adults still struggle with this, TBH. But as an adult, it's like, what do you actually want them to do? We parent and we relate with people with, this is another good note for your listeners too. They're called injunctions versus permissions. It's in parenting. Injunctions are no, stop, don't, basically being told what not to do. And it doesn't let the person learn what to do. Don't say it like that. Don't do this. Don't bring me those kind of flowers. Okay, but what if I want roses and I can just ask for that? Or like as a boss to their employee, don't submit the paper at that time. Okay, what time do you want me to submit it? Like we're left guessing. Instead, it's like, thanks so much for submitting this. Next time and every future time, 5 p.m. would be the deadline. Very clear. There's no minced words and it's not an injunction. It's a permission. Please do this. This will make you effective. This will make you successful. My theory is that a lot of the people you and I are probably coaching and working with generationally were parented in an era based on injunctions, based on seen and not spoken to, don't make a noise, don't make a peep, but also don't fail, don't be a mistake, don't make me clean up after you, don't. And that's your internal voice. Your super ego is critical. You could have a super ego instead that's an inner cheerleader, not an inner critic, which is the people parented based on permissions. Please do this, please do that. That isn't safe, so we'll do this instead. And you can reparent yourself when you're listening to this in this way. That's a lot of the work I do with my executives, imposter syndrome, what have you. You're more likely to have imposter syndrome the more successful you are because it's not true that if somebody found you out, you wouldn't be in that position. You are actually successful. But if in some ulterior universe that you actually weren't successful, you'd have so much crumble beneath you. That's why there's this pressure. And so the what is, what if, okay, what is, and what if fearing being a failure actually makes you fail? Would you keep thinking it? No. Okay, then I need to teach them what is instead. What is a success mindset? What is a growth mindset? And how do you handle inevitably when the worry police kind of come through your mind of like, what if you fail totally at this and you lose your whole business? Okay, well, I've built 3 businesses. I'll be fine. And then you quiet that voice down and that voice then doesn't have a place anymore. It's welcome in terms of you're not forcing it to retire, right? But you're letting it come up and then you're acknowledging it and you let it float away like a cloud. You don't want to be so consciously avoiding it. You're in denial because that's going to pull you out of growth. And you also don't want to then play into it so much. So I make my clients do the and then what timer for 5 minutes and I make them go to the depths of hell with what they're worried about. And they're like, and this, and I'm like, and then what? And this, and then what? And then at the end, they're like, oh, I guess this. And I was like, okay, now that we've explored that, timer's up. How likely of a possibility or probability is that? Not that likely. Okay, so we're going to just take that, throw it in the garbage, and we're going to keep moving on with what the success path looks like. Because if that happens, we've already thought about it. And you have a contingency plan. Next, like I don't let clients sit in the, this is most for coaching, obviously. I don't let clients sit in the misery too long, but I don't let clients do that in therapy either. I validate the hell out of tough situations. And believe me, I've been through a lot myself, but only sitting in the misery and being in like a burning house, like, wow, aren't these flames beautiful? Get out of the house. Like, what are you doing? Basically romanticizing pain and agony. Then, of course, you have to look back at like, who modeled that for you? What do you get from it? Do people come in and rescue you? Do people treat you like a victim and you don't actually have to do for yourself? Like, I really hit it on the deep end when it comes to their psyche of like, what do you get from that? Well, I don't have to do any work. Okay. Well, and here you're going to have to do work, so we might not be a good fit. And they're like, no, I want to work with you. I'm like, okay, then you have to change your attitude. We're not whining and complaining. We can bring things up as a complaint and I don't like this. Here's what I want instead. I'm fine with that. But when couples come in and they're just like nagging at each other, I'm like, cut it out. You could do this for free. You don't need to pay me for this. The two of you, I'm very clear on what you don't want and what's not working. I don't know what you do want and we won't know what will work until you're willing to try it. Oh, okay. Even when they try, well, all this stuff went great this week, but I said, nope, save your butt till the end. I don't want to hear it. We don't need to focus on what didn't go well. We want to hyper focus on what did go well. I'll make a little note at the end. Okay, we'll see if it comes up as a theme. And usually 3 to 4 sessions later, they're like, I was just going to nag him. Never mind.
Yeah.
So
And again, like another super important insight is this notion of paying attention to what is working.
Yeah.
Like so much of what we're talking about here is change, new,
Right.
different,
Right.
all this kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean we throw out what's working. You know,
Don't try and change everything at once. Yeah.
we're talking about reinventing yourself completely. We're talking about maybe a step toward growth.
It's a glass of water when you wake up. Like,
Right.
you can start small.
Right. What's the first step? What's the first step? And something I just really want to encourage people is just the way you talk about the success path. I mean, I think that is a beautiful just vision that people can really hang on to from this conversation is that if I say to you, tell me what your success path looks like, and you're struggling to answer that question, just start there. Just start like write a path. Like just really get crazy, get creative, be ambitious, and see what you put down on a piece of paper. And who knows, maybe within that crazy success path that you see for yourself, there's one step, there's 2 steps that realistically you could actually take on right now. Maybe you don't need anybody's help to make those happen, but maybe there's something 4, 5, 6 steps down that success path. You're like, okay, if and when I get there, that'll be the time for me to pull in this person. And you can start to like formalize that true plan. And it doesn't have to be like, okay, now that I've written it, this is what has to happen now. No, let's just map it out. Let's just check it out and see what comes. And hey, if there's a step or 2 we can take towards it right now, awesome. If we're not ready for it yet, don't throw it away.
No.
Somewhere safe.
Yeah.
Timing. Right. At some point, go back to the season. Some point the right season will come around and you'll be able to pull that success plan out.
Yeah, most people don't need a like an entire overhaul. Like they don't need a whole makeover. It's like, oh, I just needed a new pair of shoes. Or I just needed to like, I don't know, cut my work hours in half. Like start small, especially when you're making new changes in your business. This is like one of the number one mistakes people make. They get Instagram ads or Google ads or a coach on this or whatever. And they find that it's successful or like they have a freebie and like 900 people have downloaded it. And they're like, you know what I have to do? I have to make this into a course. And then they go hire a coach that it's like a 12 grand package to teach them how to make a course. And then it's like, actually, patience is what you needed. And this is speaking from experience, not those exact numbers and timeline, but like, you don't need it. It's like, oh, I sold my first high ticket coaching package, so I need to go buy a high ticket coach to coach me how to teach it more. It's like, or you can just do exactly what you did that led to that success, repeat it numerous times, and see if it actually leads you to the same success. One thing could be a fluke, but it could actually be like, no, I figured out the system that I don't need a whole overhaul. Maybe I just need to cycle one ad or put $50 more into Instagram ads. You don't need to go buy a coach to teach you what you're already successful at. You could have a mentor support you in that, but if you find that you're already having success, that is not the time to be like, now I have to blow this up grand scale, like on the big screen. It's like, keep it in small theaters metaphorically until you have enough people then coming to you of like, you know what you should do? You should put this on the big screen. Wait to build that supply till you get the demand for it. Just continue the supply you have for the demand you have. Don't try to go create a new demand because that's not the timing of the universe.
Yeah. Well, it took us a full hour,
Yeah.
someone who lives within an hour of LA, to make a Hollywood reference. So I appreciate that. um, but here's the thing, Talia, there's two ways I always assess the quality of a conversation. One is how many notes that I took and I've ran out of room on my page. Two is whether or not I broke a sweat. And anybody that's watching this on YouTube can tell I've been doing my best to hide the amount that I'm sweating throughout this conversation.
They nailed it.
And I always explain it. It's not because I'm nervous. I'm just in it. My energy's there. Like, again, it's say when I speak, I'm not a nervous speaker. I just apologize to the audience. Like, I'm going to sweat. Get over it. Sally, this has been an absolute blast. I love your content as well online, and I would hate to be the only one seeing it, even though I know I'm not. But I would love for our listeners to learn more about where they can learn all about you and anything else they might want to know.
Yeah, so I'm on myself personally, mostly on Instagram. I have a TikTok. It gets automatically posted to, but to be honest, I feel like I'm out of that generation. So both the usernames are the same. It's at Talia Bombola, so my first and last name. I have I used to have three. Yeah, I have two podcasts. One of them is Heal Through Humor, which is, if it's not evident by this conversation, I love laughter. So I have other guests on that one. And then I have Between Two Clinicians, myself and another co-host talk about like hot takes on hot topics. We have one episode coming out right before Thanksgiving of like how to navigate conflict with your in-laws, especially post-election. We talk about that for a portion of the episode. So it's like timely hot takes on hot topics. And then those are both on YouTube. And then I have a course. I finished that finally. My coaching clients get it as part of coaching, but you can get it a la carte, and it's Rewire Your Relationships. So if you're struggling with, I kind of do the foot in the door technique of like, it's about dating and this, it is about that. But as you said, it's like, it's really about the relationship with yourself. And I have had people email me, they're like, I don't want to do all this. I thought you were going to teach me how to find the one. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to teach you how to become the one, and then be okay that you might not find the one, but you could find a one. And they're like, okay, fine. So I say that as full disclosure. It's to rewire your relationships, but the most important one and the only one that you'll ever have for your entire life is with yourself. Maybe your sibling, but with yourself. So it is worth the investment, both monetarily and time-wise, to really go in and rewire those subconscious beliefs that are stopping you from either finding and keeping, or keeping and having that long-term fulfilling relationship. So I obviously highly recommend it, but it comes from 10 plus years of my research as a professor and as a therapist. I've been doing it for longer, but yeah, it's a good course. I highly recommend it. That's on my website, taliabombola.com.
Love it. We'll have all that information in the show notes. And honestly, this has been an absolute blast. I loved having you on. And just best of luck with everything and anything in your world moving forwards.
Thank you. I will take that, and same to you.
Such a great episode with Talia today. And I have to say, there's too many things, honestly, for me to try to find one. So what I'm going to try to do here is actually capture my impression, if you will, from our conversation, as opposed to a specific point that came out of our conversation. So my feeling right now, speaking with Talia, is what am I doing to continue to invest in knowing myself in the moment? Ask yourself that question right now. Do you know where you are in this moment right now in terms of how you feel, how you're showing up? Who the most authentic, natural version of yourself is? Do you like that person? Do you want to spend time with that person? Are you excited for that person to pursue what it is you're ambitious about achieving in this life? Folks, if the answer to those questions is yes, good for you. That's awesome. And I can actually say confidently right now that the answer to that question for me is yes. But I want to preface it with this. I've done a lot of damn work to say yes to that question. I have not just simply woken up and been happy. Happiness, fulfillment, whatever you want to call it. That ability for me to be able to check in and know myself to the best of my ability, it's come with work. It comes with daily work, weekly work, seasonal work. It never, ever stops. And the moment I take my finger off the pulse for a few weeks, I notice straight away something's off. That voice, that intuition that Talia spoke to in our conversation, something just doesn't feel right. And it's because I've taken my finger off the pulse and I'm no longer as connected with the investment that comes with working on myself. Folks, I need you to take priority for you. Who you are, how you show up, why you show up. all these things. This is the impression that I took from my time with Talia today. And I hope you feel the same way too. And if what I'm putting out there right now just seems too heavy, pick something specific. Pick something specific from this conversation where you know you can start your growth journey right now, or you can build upon your growth journey right now because of some of the insights that Talia was kind enough to share with us today. So thank you so much for staying with me for this full hour. And I empower you to go now and work on you. Work on that success path. See where it takes you. And as we start to wrap up 2024, know that this is a great time to spend the last couple of weeks of the year thinking about what 2025 and many, many years beyond that year could look like for you. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I appreciate you subscribing. If you don't, go ahead and start doing that. Make sure you're sharing this episode with anybody in your world that you know this could be of impact to, which I have to assume is a whole bunch of people. And as always, best of luck with anything and everything you've got going on within your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.